Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Helen Allen. I'm the Executive Director of the Winter Show. The Winter Show is now in its 72nd year. We are a benefit for Eastside House. We are owned by Eastside House, and we're grateful to all of you today because your tickets help actually fund New Yorkers in need. So we're truly, truly grateful for you for being here. I'd like to thank our partners with Asia Week New York. We're thrilled to welcome you here today. I'd like to introduce Margie Gristina, who is the chair of Asia Week New York. So please, Margie, come to the stage.
Thank you, Helen. Good afternoon. I'm Margie Gristina, the chair of Asia Week New York, and we are delighted to welcome you here today for our joint event with the Winter Show. Before we get started, for any of those who are not familiar with us, Asia Week New York is an association of prominent international Asian art galleries, major auction houses, numerous museums and cultural institutions who join together to collaborate and celebrate Asian art and year-round activities to an audience of collectors, institutions, and academics. While we hold programs throughout the year, as many of you know, our main focus of activity is centered around March Asia Week in New York, which will be held this year between March 19th and 27th. We encourage you to come back to New York if you're visiting today, or if you're local, please come and wander around our galleries during that time. From rare antiquities to contemporary masterpieces, our 2026 edition unites curated exhibitions by world-renowned dealers, live auctions, insightful panel discussions celebrating the enduring significance of Asian art within the global cultural landscape. Please be sure to check out our website for all March Asia Week programming, as well as future programs, in-time information about dealer and museum exhibitions, and to register for our weekly newsletter. And you can also follow us on Instagram for daily posts and updates. So this is our 4th year of collaboration with the Winter Show, and I'm pleased to introduce you to my colleague and friend Joan Mirviss, who really needs no introduction, is a renowned expert in Japanese art, specializing in prints, paintings, screens, and most especially contemporary ceramics for more than 40 years. She is the leading Western dealer in the field of modern and contemporary Japanese ceramics, and her New York gallery exclusively represents the top Japanese clay artists of the day. She is the co-founder of Asia Week New York and served as its first chairperson. She, in addition to authoring numerous publications, since April of 2020, she has moderated nearly 40 panels on a wide variety of Asian art topics. Since 1981, she has been an exhibitor here at the Winter Show, and she'll be moderating our STEAM panel today. Thank you, Joan.
Thank you, Margie. I should add that Margie used to be an exhibitor in this fair 30 years ago, so it's nice to have you back. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming on this brutal wintry day in New York. As Margie said, I'm one of the 2 co-founders of Asia Week, and I am actually the longest standing, literally standing exhibitor in this fair. There are others who are the grandchildren of former exhibitors, but I'm still standing, barely, but I'm trying to hold it up. So it's a particular delight for me to be joining my 2 passions, the Winter Show and Asian art, together and bringing this panel to you today. 2026, as I'm sure you know, marks the 250th signing of the Declaration of Independence. So we decided for the panel this year to turn our focus between the relationship between Asia and the United States. We wanted to address the long history of influence and exchange that has defined the relationship between Asia and this country, and accordingly, we have centered the discussion on the profound impact that Asian ceramics have had on American decorative arts and design from the 19th century to the present. So as you can see seated in front of you, we have the incredible all-star panel for you today of distinguished experts in a wide range of fields. These speakers will cover topics ranging from 19th century Western collections of Asian ceramics at American institutions, the way Asian ceramics form and surface inspired 19th and 20th century clay and silver makers, and leading into the 20th century with more recent artistic exchanges between artists in Asia and the United States. But I would also like to thank Helen Allen, who you just heard from, the executive director of this fair, who has given us this amazing opportunity to speak with you over these last 4 years, and to Lane Hubble, the communications associate who is the logistical master of this event. And most especially to Nicole Bertozzi, my gallery director, who has patiently kept these men and women on the stage on a clock and kept everyone rehearsed and slides organized. So I'm very grateful to them all. My first question I would like to present to Monika Binsick to set the stage. And as you know, Monika is the brilliant curator of Japanese decorative arts at the Metropolitan Museum. And you will hear more about her brand new show that opened this week. So, Monika, with your 2 exhibitions at the Met going on right now, you have 11,000 square feet devoted to Japanese ceramics. It's utterly amazing. I am so thrilled you have time to be with us today. And my question to you is, could you introduce us to some of the 19th century Western collectors of Asian ceramics whose work now graces institutional collections in this country? And what do these works themselves reveal about American taste in that period of time?
Thank you, Joan. It's my pleasure to be with you this afternoon, and thank you so much for including me. And I'm more than happy to talk a little bit about the Metropolitan Museum's history of collecting Japanese ceramics. After Japan was forcibly opened to Western diplomacy and trade in the 1850s, the art world underwent a major change. To finance new technologies and education, foreign currency was needed, which required strong export industries. With administrative support and foreign advisors, the ceramic industry modernized rapidly, especially in pigment and glaze formulations, and with the introduction of coal-firing kilns. Many works of the 1870s were large, densely decorated objects, well received at world exhibitions and foreign venues, along with other handmade decorative arts. By the 1870s, collecting Japanese ceramics became a key component of Japanism in Europe and the United States, promoted through mainly international expositions, beginning with the 1876 Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia. Ceramics were also popularized through other channels, including hand-colored, staged photography. After the collapse of the Tokugawa shogunate in 1868, many ceramic holdings were dispersed. The market was flooded with both everyday kitchenware and daimyo collections made unnecessary when the daimyo left their Edo residences. Others sold property to compensate for lost income. At major expositions and in art dealers' shops, antique ceramics and modern studio works were often appeared side by side. The Morimura brothers began business in New York in 1876, selling antiques, everyday pottery, fans, and dolls, later becoming major porcelain manufacturers. At the same time, Japanese ceramicists were redefining their roles. Before 1868, pottery was largely hereditary and often under daimyo patronage. Some Edo period wares made for the elite appealed to foreigners, and their characteristic features were adopted for export. At the same time, the first self-defined professional potters emerged, while others, such as Itaya Hazan, entered through new Western-style art schools. Francis Brinkley witnessed this transformation firsthand. Born in Ireland, he moved to Japan in 1867 and became a military advisor to the Meiji government. He later owned and edited the Japan Mail, later Japan Times. Beginning in 1897, he produced the 10-volume Japan Described and Illustrated by the Japanese. As a long-term Yokohama resident, Brinkley accessed private collections, contemporary art, and major antique dealers. Ceramic history was a lifelong interest. He worked closely with leading antiquarians, including Ninagawa Noritake, who sold him objects and advised him on connoisseurship. Ninagawa Noritake joined the Meiji administration in 1869 and from 1871 served in the Ministry of Education's Museum Bureau. He traveled extensively for the Jinshin Survey of Cultural Properties, documenting Japan's cultural heritage. He also helped organize the Western-inspired Yushima Seido exposition in 1872, which became the foundation of the Tokyo National Museum. In 1877, Ninagawa published the illustrated book of Past Things, ceramic section, Kanko Zusetsu, Tokinobu, part of a 7-volume series. He emphasized direct study of the objects and assembled a study collection of over 2,000 works. His publications reflect traditions of medical illustrations and catalogs of famous objects, meibutsu. Through collecting and research, Ninagawa developed a close relationship with Edward C. Morse. Morse, an American zoologist, taught at the University of Tokyo in 1877-78 and returned in 1882-83 to study pottery. A systematic observer, he relied on Ninagawa's assistance while acquiring more than 400 pieces from his collection. By 1892, Morse had assembled over 5,000 ceramics, which he donated to the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, with a catalog published in 1900 documenting makers, dates, marks, functions, and decoration. Morse also identified many errors in James Bow's 1881 ceramic classification, noting that much of his collection consisted of exportware. In the 1880s, detailed kiln and maker information from Japan entered European classification systems. However, authenticity, workshop practices, cultural context, and Japanese connoisseurship traditions were largely ignored. Charles Stuart Smith, an American businessman, collector, and Met trustee, traveled to Japan in 1892 on his honeymoon with Anna Walton Brown. He bought a major group of prints, ceramics, and painting from Brinkley in Yokohama, and immediately donated over 400 ceramics to the Met, primarily porcelain including Nabeshima, Hirado, Kakiemon, Kutani, and as well as Kyoto and Satsuma wares. Many of these were published in Brinkley's Ceramic Art, 1901. I'm showing a few examples from our collection that were included in Brinkley's book. We'll start with 2 freshwater jars, one decorated with a kirin, the other with the poetry gathering at the Orchid Pavilion, both from the 18th century. A pair of karako playing go, also Hirado, 18th century. A tea bowl with rising sun and crane by Eiraku Hosen, made in Kyoto around the mid-19th century. And a selection of Bizenware incense burners. Brinkley's ceramic art in 1901 was one of the most significant Western studies of Japanese ceramics, and it's organized by production regions and kilns, combining historical narrative with catalog entries. Today, nearly 500 ceramics at the Met are associated with Brinkley, with additional works at MFA Boston. Through Charles Stuart Smith, Brinkley played a key role in shaping American taste for Japanese ceramics, mainly porcelain. Finally, let me show you a few more examples from the Brinkley collection. A beautiful Nabeshima dish from at the end of the 17th century, decorated with peaches, the best quality porcelain produced in Japan. They were gifts to the shogunate. A sencha tea jar with phoenixes and peonies in Kochi style by Eiraku Hosen, a Kyoto potter from the early 19th century. A water jar with plum tree by Kato Tomotaro, made around 1890s. And the last slide I have for this question is a lidded vessel made by Makuzo Kozan I, made again at the end of the 19th century.
Thank you. That was great. You set the stage for Ulysses. We looked at a lot of interesting forms. And Ulysses, thank you for being here and giving us a bit of wisdom from your many decades at the Newark Museum. Can you give us an idea of how American potters were influenced by their early encounters with Asian ceramics in the mid to late 19th century? And furthermore, what impact did these Asian vessels have on the kinds of forms that American potters were inspired to create?
The Newark Museum was founded in 1909 by a librarian. In fact, the man who invented the modern library system in the United States. He is revered among librarians, but he also sort of invented the modern museum in direct opposition to the Metropolitan and the MFA Boston and the Philadelphia Museum. And the inaugural collection in that institution in 1909 was 4,000 Japanese objects that were purchased by a pharmacist in Newark named George Rockwell. So I don't think George Rockwell went to Japan, or he might have gone to the Philadelphia exhibition, and he certainly could have come into New York City. But these are two objects. The Chinese one, it said Japanese on the files, but there were Chinese things in the collection. But these are two objects as sort of a robin's egg monochrome, Qing Dynasty presumably, and then a very clearly what we all as curators would recognize as a Japanesque style vase, probably designed for the Western market, but of a distinctive form. And but this was the inspiration. Mr. Dana collected Asian material right away because he saw that Asian culture did not hierarchicalize, didn't have hierarchies among the arts. So everything was art. And that was his goal, is everything was art for all time, all over the world, for everybody. And so it was a very sort of populist kind of idea. So these two are pieces I particularly like, and the one on the right could well have been bought out of a shop in New York City. One of Mr. Dana's blind spots is that he loved the Japanese, he loved Germans, and he loved the English, but he didn't like French people. And I think that's a rather big gap in the story. So on the left is a piece I bought for the museum, specifically of a very plain shape by Adrien Dalpeyrat, who was sort of one of the fathers of art pottery in Europe. And specifically what I love about this piece is that it is what I would conceive of, what Westerners would see as a classic Chinese shape, an Oriental shape with beautiful mottled complicated glazes. Americans loved that. And I think a lot of what happens in American art pottery, like this piece by E. Robertson on the right, demonstrate that, which is to say a Chinese shape with Japanese glazes as conceived of by the French, which was then the inspiration for American studio potters. I would say most people who collect art pottery ignore this because it's not arts and crafts, it's not modern looking. And in fact, there's a very strong anti-modern sentiment in the love of this, that the Chinese shape or the Japanese shape was the embodiment of the pristine, perfect beauty. And that's something that I think is ignored a lot. And I didn't, not that I've written about it a lot, but I've thought about it a lot as I dug through the collection because it reflects Mr. Dana's attitude about that. And so these are one of these I bought, but on the one on the left is from the Clifton Art Pottery in Newark, New Jersey, all of them done in a high-fired porcelaneous clay, so very much looking at what the French are doing. And then this line of glazes called Crystal Patina, and I for years thought it was just sort of dull, but if you look at it, it's quite a beautiful, slightly sparkly glaze. And this is Mr. Dana's idea of a perfect piece of modern pottery, which evokes those Asian glazes in Chinese forms. And this was made in 1909 and was bought by the museum in 1911 for $15, which is probably more than my salary would have been in a week at that time. And on the right is something else I acquired for the museum because Mr. Dana would have found him offensive, is George Orr, who is revered for all sorts of things, and I don't need to tell you that. But I bought this piece specifically because I thought this looks like a Tang Dynasty vase that he made in perfect, incredibly thin pottery and then crumpled to make it his. And so he knew what he was talking about. He knew the history of Asian ceramics as they were in museums by the end of the 19th century. Two of these pieces, I think, which I have been told echo Korean shapes, but on the left is the Fulper Pottery in Flemington, New Jersey, purchased in 1914 for the museum. It's a unique piece because it was glazed for an exhibition. As I say, this is an Asian glaze or a Japanese glaze, but it was called leopard skin crystal, distinctive to Fulper and inspired by a New Jersey frog. So there you are. And on the right, William Joseph Wally, a Massachusetts studio potter who did everything himself, dug the clay, ground the glazes, but he was a fellow of the Society of Arts and Crafts in Boston, from whom we bought this in 1914 for $14. So just showing you that this conscious evocation of Asian forms and Asian glazes, possibly inspired by the French, is very much part of what America does. And my last slide here is just a very large Fulbert vase, hand-thrown, with this glaze that was known as Chinese blue. And why anybody thought it was Chinese blue is the mystery of branding experts in 19th century or 20th century ceramics. And then on the right, a tiny little porcelain vase made in St. Louis by Adelaide Alsop Robineau that we bought for $20 in 1914. And she was under the tutelage of French potter Taxil Doat at that point, who was teaching her crystalline glazes. So these are all things, and she was always inspired by Asian sources. So I'll stop there for this one.
Thank you, Ulysses. I love the forms that you've chosen to illustrate today that resonate so much with both China and Japan. Beautiful. David Barquist, I'm delighted to welcome you here from Philadelphia. And as Ulysses just discussed the importance of Asian ceramics on American pottery forms, perhaps you can now introduce us to the surface and the glazes stimulated by the contact between Asia and America.
Sure. Actually, I'm going to just talk about decoration as well as glaze. So as we've heard from Monica, there were multiple ways that American potters could experience Japanese ceramics firsthand by the last quarter of the 19th century, international exhibitions being probably the best known. Miyagawa Kozan exhibited in the Philadelphia Centennial and in most of the big international expositions, and his specialty were these, or what he was renowned for, were these sort of life-size three-dimensional appliques and critters of the various kinds. And you should also notice, since we're talking about surface, the very irregular glaze on this vessel, which is an important cultural property in Japan, as it should be. And this kind of ware, which of course didn't look anything like any Western pottery at the time, influenced a lot of people like Thomas Wheatley in Cincinnati, who produced this object. He visited the Philadelphia Centennial, no doubt had seen a piece of Miyagawa's work. And you'll notice again the irregular glaze on the body of the object, and then the three-dimensional, less dramatic than the Japanese prototype, but still life-size, probably cast from the real thing, ornament of shells and crayfish and that sort of thing. So that's the influence of international exhibitions. As we've also heard, of course, there was a huge export trade in ceramics from Japan to the United States and the rest of Western world after the opening up of Japan by the gunboat diplomacy of our government. And one type of ceramic, which Ulysses has already mentioned, is this, what we now consider very ornate, white-bodied ware. Sometimes it's stoneware, sometimes it's porcelain, that's all gathered under the name of Satsuma ware. Whether or not it was made in that region, it is not necessarily the case, and it was something that was very much fostered by the Meiji government. The vase on the left was in the World's Columbian, the official Japanese exhibition in the World's Columbian Exposition, one of a pair, and it's again in the Tokyo National Museum. So they were very proud of this ware, and it was collected by collectors on the highest level. So it wasn't just sort of haute bourgeois taste. On the right is a bowl that Henry Walters, who was an extremely renowned collector of Asian, both historic and contemporary Asian porcelain, acquired in 1904. And this kind of ware also influenced American potters, as you can see in this vase by the Faience Manufacturing Company in Brooklyn, which has the same kind of banded decoration and raised gold paste ornament, very dense, again, same aesthetic. The shape of this object is actually more Near Eastern than Japanese, so it's this kind of, synthesis of different exotic, quote unquote, elements. You can also find Satsuma ware with this kind of vermiculated band ornament, which is really a Western style, but of course the Japanese ceramists are making things they think will appeal to the Western audiences. So these influences are not just one in one direction. And even as Ulysses has alluded, it's also in the case of American ceramists, it's also coming from Europe. So European potters are also looking at Satsuma ware, and you see on the right a Worcester vessel in that same style. On the left is a Japanese vase of that type that was actually in the Worcester Potteries corporate collection for their potters to study. The picture that I have is when Worcester disbanded their collection in the 20th century and sold all of that stuff. But they were studying these things very carefully. And of course, Edward Lysette at Faience Manufacturing Company was a British potter who came to the United States. So he was probably looking at both British and Japanese versions of this ware. Now, as we've heard, as time went on, as we move into the 1890s, Westerners are becoming much more sophisticated in their understanding of the history of Japanese pottery, and the collections that Monica's talked about were being put together. There's an example on the right from the Edward Morse collection, on the left by Edward Moore, the great designer at Tiffany & Company. Very different kind of ware from the sort of Meiji-sponsored decorated ware. The kinds of things we think of as sort of classic Japanese ceramics. And these begin to have an influence, and Ulysses has already really talked about the fact that these irregular glazes, George Orr's interest in kind of not perfect shapes, the sort of valuing of imperfection is something that American potters learned from these Japanese ceramists. And I'll just end by saying that, again, that influence goes back to Japan, and that taste for sort of duller colors and matte glazes that we saw in the later things Ulysses shows is reflected in work by Japanese potters like Itaya Hazan.
Thank you, David, and thank you for putting the Itaya Hazan slide up there. It's one of my favorite pieces of early 20th century Japanese ceramics in the world, and it was really prescient to that was a prize-winning piece at the exposition that Mr. Walters bought. It still is in the collection of the Walters Art Gallery. And if you saw the Meiji Japan show at Asia Society just down the street, it was one of the best pieces in the entire show. Elizabeth Williams from RISD. You're the only person I had met before, so welcome. Thank you for answering my call. My first question to you is, as you know well, the influence of Asian ceramics was not limited to the creation and production of pottery in the United States. Can you tell us a bit about the ways in which the renowned American firm of Gorham Silver incorporated Asian ceramic design into their innovative works, and which were created predominantly in silver, but sometimes porcelain as well?
Yes, thank you, Joan. I will be sharing a little bit about how the influence of Asian ceramics found its way into another medium of American design in the last half of the 19th century, and that is silver as well as mixed metals. Specifically, I will focus on Japanese ceramics and silver from the Gorham Manufacturing Company, which was founded in Providence, Rhode Island in 1831. We'll be looking at Here we are seeing a silver tureen made by Gorham in 1884. Every bit of this tureen is covered with very detailed chasing. The carp leap from the roiling waves, creating an incredibly dramatic sense of movement. Now, Rhode Island is the ocean state, so marine inspiration abounds, but here the choices of carp certainly nods to Japanese influences, as seen with the Satsuma earthenware cream and gold bowl dated circa 1860 from the V&A. Of more particular note is the way the cresting waves topped with claw-like foam are rendered. The Japanese blue and white porcelain jardiniere, which was shown in the Japanese section of the 1862 Great Exhibition in London and subsequently purchased by the V&A, depicts 3 cranes circling over the same type of waves, which are most likely leading to the next image, which may be popping into your head. The well-known Great Wave off Kanagawa was created by Katsushika Hokusai during the period of 1830 to 1833 as part of his famous series 36 Views of Mount Fuji. These waves also found their way into Hokusai's manga, a 15-volume set of sketches and drawings published between 1814 and 1878. This publication served as a visual encyclopedia of Japanese life, nature, and the supernatural, and was very influential on Western art. A little tamer here. I show you an 1880 mixed metal Gorham base featuring a rooster and hen, very similar to an example in the manga, as well as other Japanese motifs. Although we do not always know from whence inspiration derives, I can say with certainty that Gorham had 7 volumes of the manga in their design library, which had arrived by 1871. And I would say that the worn condition of these volumes attests to their extreme popularity in the design studios. Of course, the same motifs can be found in ceramics, a medium also highly influenced by the manga. This, a 19th century Kutani plate in Risdi's collection. Considering the form of the vessel itself, inspiration also came from Japanese ceramics, such as these 2 Kyushu teapots on the right, characterized by their side handles. The top from the Metz collection, an early 19th century Sencha teapot of porcelain with celadon glaze and dragon decorations, and the lower from the British Museum, a Meiji-era glazed stoneware example. Gorham's 1883 pot has clearly adapted the form with a silver side handle and spout, and an added bonus of a 3-dimensional silver dragon that wraps its body around the entire vessel. This type of relief ornamentation can be seen in many Asian ceramic examples, including this late 19th century Japanese porcelain censer with a fantastic dragon wrapped around its base. The idea of a perching creature that also serves as a functional element of an object is also seen with the censer's fully rendered food dog sitting atop the globe and operating as a sort of finial. Similarly, Gorham's copper, brass, and silver lamp or lighter sports a ferocious dragon as a handle. Taking the idea further with non-mystical creatures, and thank you for that setup. This 1881 glazed stoneware footed bowl by the Japanese ceramist Miyagawa Kozan features a fantastic crab climbing up the side of the vessel. And I think you can see the idea has been translated very well into American silver in this equally fantastic Gorham oyster tureen and stand dated 1884 from the Dallas Museum of Art. And I am sure that you have already noticed the carp and the Hokusai waves repeated from the first 1884 tureen that I showed. Moving to Japanese relief decoration, taking a trompe-l'oeil turn, this 1805 Satsuma storage jar, or tea caddy from the British Museum, is seemingly covered with a gathered decorative textile and tied with a cord. And here it meets its nearly identical twin in silver with this 1880 Gorham tea caddy, covered with a fringed textile, which is also neatly secured with a bow. Continuing with translating fibrous material into metal, as well as borrowing a Japanese functional form, this 1850 earthenware Osaka teapot with a rattan-wrapped hooked handle from the Smithsonian National Museum of Asian Art is translated into gleaming silver with this 1871 Gorham teapot and stand. The intricacy of the silver wrapping and the braiding on the handle is especially impressive. In addition to the realistic 3-dimensional rendering of textiles, Japanese textile patterns, seen in the center of this image, were also influential in ceramics. These types of patterns can also be found in Japanese lacquer design, as shown in Owen Jones' The Grammar of Ornament on the right. On the left, a pair of Satsuma vases are encircled top and bottom with myriad small-scale geometric patterns. Could this have been the design source for Gorham's 24 butter dishes seen here? Each of the gilded silver dishes features a different design. They are part of a 219-piece dinner service made to serve 24 people amassed by Henry Jewett Ferber between 1866 and 1880. I was also intrigued by the similarities with this 19th century glazed stoneware or oribe dish with abstract motifs from the Met and the Gorham butter dishes. Oribe ware decorations were often inspired by textile designs. Shifting gears a little bit, I would like to focus for a moment on Japanese influence on American ideas about what metals, precious or base, were considered suitable, as well as whether the mixing thereof was acceptable. The body of the teapot that we viewed earlier is iron, combined with sterling silver and copper. Fairly rare, Gorham called the line banko, which means eternal or unchanging in Japanese. American silversmithing practices originated from British standards, which forbid the mixing of precious and base metals via the Hallmarking Act. So when this 1883 teapot was made, this combination of base and precious metals was quite a departure from tradition. Here I show you a Meiji era Japanese design drawing based on its brilliant colors. One might guess that it was meant to be manifested in enamel glazes on a ceramic vessel. However, this is a design drawing for Yamamoto Koichi for an early 1880s bronze, silver, and shikudo mixed metal vase by Suzuki Chokichi for the Kuritsu Kosho Keisha, the Meiji government-established Japanese manufacturing and trading company. Japanese metalsmiths developed a substantial number of metal alloys to achieve specific colors and patination effects, resulting in a wide range of aesthetic possibilities. American silversmiths took note, especially employing different metals, alloys, and patinations, expanding the color palette beyond the expected. Although not quite as brilliantly hued, this 1879 vase by Gorham is an original take on mixing metals. Part of their curio line, the pebbled mixed metal effect is achieved by pressing small pieces of copper and brass into softened molten sterling. On one side of the vase is a copper applique of a fierce samurai warrior, which might have come from a Japanese ceramic example. However, we've got to give this one to Hokusai, as you can clearly see from this drawing. To end, I share with you this ceramic ewer owned by the Cincinnati Art Museum, dated 1890 to 92. It was designed by Kotaro Shiro Yamadami, a decorative ceramics painter born in Japan who worked at Rookwood. Once made, the ewer was sent to Gorham, who added a sinuous design in silver deposition, or electroplating. For the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, Gorham made a number of these works with overlays on ceramics and glass. So I will let the pitcher's sinuous pair of dragons that swirl around the vessel in the deep golden glaze bring us full circle, and thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Glenn, let's move forward in time. I'm so glad you're here. It's really important to have the man who understands the 20th century and clay better than anyone else. So could you please discuss some of the ways in which 20th century artists on both sides of the pond influenced each other as they deconstructed these aesthetic tropes?
Thank you, Joan. And I want to just take a quick turn into autobiography, if you'll permit me, because I want to say how pleased I am to be sitting on the stage with all these folks, and particularly mention that when I was first starting out my career and I was an unpaid intern at the Everson Museum of Art at the time in Syracuse, a museum with a great ceramics collection, someone suggested to me that I should go down and meet Ulysses Dietz. And so he was virtually the first curator I ever met. This is about 1994. And I heard him talking about ceramics just in the way that you just heard. And I thought to myself, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And here I am. So thank you, Ulysses. And I met David Barquist the next year when I went to Yale, then sequestered in the furniture study and he became another role model, and then Joan, and of course Monica and Elizabeth. So one big happy family up here, and I'm so happy to be part of it. So let me now get to the substance of what I wanted to say, and I want to start, as I almost am compelled to, with Toshiko Takeizu. I was very fortunate to be on the curatorial team for this touring exhibition called Worlds Within, that looked at Takeizu's career originating at the Noguchi Museum here in New York, and it's just about to open at its last venue on its national tour all the way back in Honolulu. Takeizu was from Hawaii to begin with, and she had a fascinating career, which I'm going to summarize for you in about 25 seconds, of which had, in addition to early training at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and then at Cranbrook Academy of Art in Michigan, included a very important trip back to Japan. I say back to, she's of course Japanese American, or more accurately Okinawan American, born to an Okinawan immigrant family of essentially migrant farmers. And after she graduated from Cranbrook, 1954, 1955, she had the chance to go to Japan in person with her mother and sister. And one of the things that she wanted to do was seek out the work of a woman called Rengetsu, who was a nun, a Buddhist nun, in the middle of the 19th century, who was famous for inscribing her works with poetry. And she managed to find one in an antique shop, didn't have the money to buy it, but was able to hold it in her hands. And then she embarked on this extraordinary trip through Japan, seeking out both traditional and avant-garde ceramists. When we were doing our research in the archive of Takeizu's life and work, we found this amazing image that you see on the left, which is a slide she took with her camera, probably in January 1955 or so. And of course, it shows Kazuo Yagi, the great Japanese avant-garde ceramist, the leader of the Sodesha group, a figure that Joan has done a huge amount to raise visibility about here in the United States. And what's more, the sculpture that's sitting in front of him, which is called Direction of the Wind, just came to the Metropolitan from the Halsey and Alice North collection. So we have a true full circle moment here. But this is also an opportunity for me to say that Takeizu, like Yagi, and also other ceramic artists of their generations who would have thought of themselves self-consciously as progressive or avant-garde, would have completely rejected all of the beautiful objects that you have been seeing so far, with hardly any exceptions, maybe the Kenzan bowl that flashed by, but everything that you've seen on the screen so far would have been of virtually no interest to them, because of course this was the moment of radicalism, it was the moment of abstract expressionism in America, it was the moment of Sodesha and the other great Japanese avant-garde movements, and it was a time to reject all that had come before, and particularly to embrace the idea that ceramics can be avant-garde art. Now, for this reason, interestingly, figures like Takeizu embraced the idea of Eastern ceramics and also other genres, but ceramics particularly, because precisely of the non-hierarchical arrangement of the arts that Ulysses mentioned. So even if they weren't necessarily interested in certainly the 19th century exposition wares that you've been seeing, for example, they were very attracted to the idea that ceramics could stand on equal stature with painting, with sculpture, and be equally validated as an art form. And the result of that is objects by Takeizu, like the one that you see here, which is from the Detroit Institute of Art, which, you're not supposed to have favorites. It's like you're not supposed to have favorite children, but this might be my favorite object that we had in the show. This absolutely astonishing object, very close to a closed form, the sort of signature typology of her career, although it still has this vestigial sculptural mask on the top, but this amazing glaze pattern with a kind of heavy, dripping, thick layer of slip and glaze coming down its surface. So a kind of molten object that still seems to be forming itself as you're looking at it, and clearly refers, of course, to Japanese ink painting, particularly associated with Zen, so that one stroke painting. Now, if there was one artist that Takeizu respected here in America, it was Peter Voulkos, who is very often thought of as being primarily influenced by abstract expressionism, but actually was at least as influenced by Japanese ceramics, although again, not necessarily in the way that you might expect. So if you look at the object on the left, you might, for example, think of ancient Haniwa figures, those incredible stacked kind of guardian sculptures that appear in archaic tombs in Japan. So that's very kind of parched surface, and the idea of using a combination of slab and thrown elements to create this essentially quasi-figural sculpture. And of course, then having started there with this idea of disruption or deconstruction, Volkus then went on to make these absolutely amazing sculptures, probably the most important 20th century American ceramic sculptures in 1958, 59, 1960, when he had his last years in Los Angeles before relocating to Berkeley. And there is one of them. And, you know, you'd be hard pressed to find a really strong connection here between, again, any of the objects that we've seen so far. And this sculpture, it's probably more taking its lead from Picasso and Cubism. Think about its palette, for example, very much the palette of synthetic Cubism. But the spirit of it, the embrace of asymmetry, of chance, accidental form, that's very much coming out of Japanese ceramics and Japanese painting. And just to wrap up, I also just want to mention a couple of people that were in Volkus's orbit that were coming from the Pacific context. So one of those would be Jun Kaneko, who arrived to California in the 1960s, not speaking any English, but having a very keen interest in what he discovered in this Los Angeles and then Bay Area-based avant-garde Japanese scene. And this object on the right, which was included in the famous exhibition Objects USA, which you may know about, the kind of high water mark of the post-war craft movement, I think suggests something that he was getting both out of Volkus's extraordinarily insurrectionary attitude to ceramics, but also the contemporaneous pop art of the time, maybe something of Japanese graphics of the time is in there too. Again, manga, there's something of an animated figure to it, but really kind of off in its own aesthetic space. And this really launched him into a career of experimentation that we know him for today, particularly those large dango sculptures, if you know those works of Kaneko's. And then we have a figure like Henry Takamoto, who actually had studied in the same program at the University of Hawaii at Manoa as Takeizu. Just as a side note, that program, which was run by someone he called Claude Haran, was one of the really experimental contexts for creating ceramics in the United States in the 1950s, 1960s. Not very well known because it was in Hawaii, so didn't have a lot of direct connections apart from people who came to the mainland. But Takeizu was one of those, and so was Henry Takamoto. And what's also interesting to note about him is that this is a little like the story that you told about the kind of circuitous global roots of Hugh Robertson's work. His primary inspiration was actually ancient Minoan ceramics. So you know those pots that have the octopi on them and other sea creatures? Again, the maritime vibe that you were talking about with Rhode Island. That was his primary departure point for these amazing objects, which again have this kind of cubist palette, very influenced by Volkus, who was really the person that he embraced as his sort of pole star at that time. Okay, and I'm going to pick it up with contemporary later on, but that's the 50s and 60s.
Thank you, thank you. If you're desperate to see as you will hear later, the gorgeous Direction of the Wind by Yagi Kazuo, it's on view at the Met right now, and additionally, a major Toshiko Takeizu monumental form reigns over the balcony cases from the information desk downstairs, so you have great opportunities to see these works in person. I'd like to turn back to Ulysses for his last question. Having touched on the 19th century, how were Asian ceramic forms reinterpreted, still speaking of form, in the 20th century into modern American studio pottery? And what changes do we see as we move throughout the 20th century?
One, I've always been a vessel person because I'm a decorative arts curator, not an art curator. And I know some people think they're the same thing, but they're not quite. But I've always been interested in the idea of ceramics as art as a continuum from whenever it really crops up in the 19th century as a concept and how it really just goes on. And that's the way the museum's collection was built. And I'm not really touching on the Asian collections. You know, Newark has 20,000 pieces of Asian ceramics, and I don't know enough about any of them except a few that I've seen. But we're jumping to Philadelphia in the 1920s. These are pieces we bought new in 1926 to celebrate the opening of the new Newark Museum building. They're both by Leon Volkmar, who started out working with his art pottery father in New Jersey and then went off on his own and taught in Philadelphia. And these are two pieces that, to me, they're kind of this weird transition moment. So what is 1926? Is it the arts and crafts movement, or is it the studio pottery movement? Because studio craft did not really start after World War II, but because there were a lot of people who did it that were alive in the teens and 20s and went back, and Leon Volkmar being one of them. And I could also argue what I see as particularly 20s about these two pieces is the way they've taken this color, which on the left I think is actually meant to be an Egyptian form, although Egyptian, Asian, anybody who saw it in the Newark Museum in the 1920s wouldn't have known the difference or cared. But this striking turquoise color, which becomes a huge thing in the 1920s, there are pieces out on the floor from France that show that same thing. And on the right, this lotus form bowl, sort of aubergine on the outside and turquoise faience on the inside. I'm sure Mr. Dana saw these as modern, but he loved modern things that didn't feel modern, because he was born in 1856, so he was very comfortable in the 19th century. And then for that same exhibition we acquired for the new museum, we went around and tried to go back to all the art potters we'd bought from before. And so we bought this sort of monumental vase by Adelaide Robineau. The real thing I think about Adelaide Robineau is she was an obsessive compulsive craftsperson because she carved with a needle, and anyone who knows her great, the apotheosis of the toiler, the scarab vase in Syracuse, where I grew up. This sort of fits into that mode. This was made in 1924, and we bought it in 1926. But it's a classically Asian form with classically Asian crackled white glaze, utterly controlled. This is where she's very French. The glaze is not accidental. That dripping is carved. The turning rings below it were carved into place to keep the glaze from moving. And that's something I've seen on French pieces of the early 20th century. So she is looking at this and making a piece this is something that a contemporary studio pottery expert like Garth Clark would have dismissed as retardataire, but he's wrong. I love Garth and I talk to him, but he's wrong. This is a modern piece. This is a piece that's looking at the sort of rising modernism in design in the 1920s and adapting her love of the perfect Asian form with her obsession about these controlled French glazes all in one. And right with it is someone she knew and who started out doing exhibitions at the Newark Museum in 1910, which is Charles Fergus Binns, who is seen as the father of modern studio pottery in terms of academics, but in fact is working in the arts and crafts movement with a very Asian, pristine, perfect, and for years I considered this dull. I fell in love with it as I looked at it more and more, because I realized that, like the Robineau piece, this is about control. This is about doing the perfect, pristine pot and sort of homage to the Asian roots of all of this kind of material. And then this expands into the sort of folkways of American rural potteries. These are all bought when they're brand new for like $1 or $2 by the museum. The purple one, which is blue glaze over a red glaze, called Amethyst by the Bybee Pottery in Kentucky. We paid $2 for this, actually. And then a whole group of things from Seagrove, North Carolina, by the Aumann Pottery, evoking both American folk forms and archaic Chinese forms with these, again, to me, sort of Tang Dynasty splashes that I know the potters who made this did not know this. They were being told what to do by the ladies who had the shop in New York where it was all sold. But this is late 1920s. And just to leap forward, like the Natzlers in the West, here up in Canada, there was a couple whose first names I've totally forgotten, but their name was Deichmann, and they were very prominent potters in Canada in this exact same period in the 40s and 50s. And we have two very Asian-looking little pieces by them. This one is a favorite, just with this crackled two-tone glaze. Again, this sort of focusing on control and precision and simplified sort of Zen-like Asian forms. And on the right, one of my personal favorites, that this is a tiny piece, it's like 4 inches high, by Gertrude and Otto Natzler, which in 1949 we paid $50 for, eggshell-thin stoneware, and clearly evoking this same kind of minimalist, delicate, had I hate using the word Zen like this, but this sort of simple and thoughtful, a piece you would put on a table, but you wouldn't dare use it at all, which is what the Natzlers wanted. And then just at the end is just to think about, you can find him out on the floor today too, Thomas Bezenson, Brother Thomas, whose work I was introduced to when I suddenly realized I should look at more conservative stuff. I shouldn't just be buying like crazy modern things. I should buy non-crazy modern things. And he sort of fit the bill. And the one on the left is this mustard and black streaked lentoid vase from the 90s that I bought for Newark, sort of to bring that idea of these vessels forward into the, well, what was then the present day. And then an earlier piece in Oxblood, Mr. Dana loved red things, and there's red ceramics scattered through the collection that he acquired, so I took this into the museum sort of in homage to him. And then finally, the other Lee, Stephen Young Lee, who is an American-born of Korean ancestry, whose work is also carrying on in that same way.
Thank you, Ulysses. My next question goes to David. We've already touched upon actually Japanese people who've come to America to teach, and most importantly, Kitaro Shiro Yamadani. And can you tell us about his legacy at Rookwood in Cincinnati, Ohio?
Yes. Well, Kitaro Shiro Yamadani, we don't know a lot about him. He's one of those artists who liked giving different accounts of his life at different times. So in fact, the birth date you see up there on the screen is the one from his obituary, but at other times he claimed to be older than that. So we know he came to the United States from Japan. His obituary says he was born in Kanazawa, although he also claimed he was born in Tokyo. You see him here at 3 different stages of his life, all photographs taken after he had come to the United States, which he did in the 1880s. He claimed that he came from a pottery family and was trained as a porcelain decorator. And he came to the United States in the early 1880s and worked for a Boston import firm decorating porcelain blanks. And we don't know what any of those looked like, but at one point early on in his career at Rookwood, he decorated this set of Haviland blanks for William Taylor that show very much a Western style of decoration with these sort of Palmer Cox brownies decorating pottery. So that's probably the kind of thing he was doing in Boston. Now, Mariah Longworth Nichols, founder of Rookwood Pottery, went to the Centennial, was blown away by the Japanese ceramics she saw, came back to Cincinnati, and founded the Rookwood Pottery to create art pottery in that mode. And the early work at Rookwood are things like Elizabeth has shown us, where they take motifs from publications like Hokusai's manga and use them to decorate the pottery. But Mariah Nichols very much wanted an actual Japanese artist to do the decoration. And interestingly, Kitaro Shiro Yamadani came to Cincinnati as part of a living Japanese working pottery and other crafts that was an exhibit at a Cincinnati Industrial Exposition. And she basically, in 1886, and she hires him. He goes to work at Rookwood doing, as we've seen this piece before in Elizabeth's talk, very Japanese style decoration on very much Western forms. And as Elizabeth said, this is an object that went to the Gorham Manufacturing Company and got this very sort of Art Nouveau silver mounts that don't have a lot to do with the dragons on the body, but no matter. Shiro Yamadani also designed shapes at Rookwood. This is one of the shapes that he introduced, very much your classic severe Asian shape. He did not decorate this object. So he's very much a privileged artist at Rookwood. He designs a lot of their exhibition pieces. And after the success of the World's Columbian Exposition in 1893, Rookwood sends its different artists to different parts of Europe to study historic ceramics. Shiro Yamadani goes back to Japan. And when he comes back in the sort of 1894, 1895, he starts working on this line of objects with these electroplated metal sections to them. They're not actually mounts. They're actually clay that has been sculpted as part of the object's thrown, and then the clay is applied and the critter is sculpted. And then metal is electro-deposited onto that section only. So it's not like the Gorham resistware, it's a different thing. It was very expensive to make, and time-consuming. And Shurya Madani seems to be one of the only artists at Rookwood that actually did objects of this type. They're very rare. It was only done for about 6 years. But that's one of the special things he focused on. The other special thing he did was the black iris line that Rookwood designed for the 1900 Paris exposition.
Thank you, David.
I just want to say that if you want to know more, Joan Mirviss Gallery has the most extraordinary interview program on the website, so you can learn all about it then. Thanks all for coming.
Thank you all so much.